The rifle shot echoed across the frozen valley, and Clara Whitmore knew someone was about to die. Standing in the snow between her husband and the richest man in the territory, she'd become the prize in a war she never asked to fight. Behind her, the scarred mountain man who'd bought her like cattle. In front, Silas Mercer's hired guns with fingers on triggers. Her father had sold her to settle his debts, but these men were willing to kill for ownership. The next 60 seconds would decide if she lived as someone's property or died trying to be free. If you want to know how a girl with no options became the woman who changed everything, stay with me until the end. And hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The church bells shouldn't have rung that morning. Clara Whitmore stood in the back room of Black Hollow's only church, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror someone had propped against the wall. The dress hung on her frame like a burial shroud, faded blue cotton that had belonged to her mother, back when her mother still smiled. Back before the drinking started, before the gambling, before her father became the kind of man who traded his daughter to pay what he owed. 20 years old, and this was how her story ended. Through the thin walls, she could hear them gathering. The whole damn town had come to watch, not to celebrate, to witness. There was a difference, and Clara knew it in her bones. She'd seen the looks all week, pity mixed with something uglier. Relief, maybe. Relief that it was her standing here instead of their daughters. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Her father's voice made her flinch. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, trying to look like a man instead of whatever hollow thing he'd become. His fingers trembled slightly. They always did now, between drinks. "Don't," Clara's voice came out flat. "Don't pretend this is something it's not." "Clara, how much?" She turned to face him. "How much was I worth, Papa? What's the going rate for your only child?" Thomas's face crumpled. For a second, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Enough to keep us alive," he said quietly. "Enough to keep the ranch. Enough to buy you another year at the poker table?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Not survival, not keeping the ranch. You lost money you didn't have to men you shouldn't have crossed, and I'm the payment." "He's not what they say." Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Crow, he's rough, sure, but he's fair. He won't hurt you. He promised me—" "He promised you?" Clara's hands balled into fists. "You sold me to a stranger, and you're telling me about his promises?" The church bells started ringing. Thomas reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Time to go," he said. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find some trace of the father who'd taught her to ride, who'd carried her on his shoulders through town, who'd once threatened to horsewhip a ranch hand for looking at her wrong. That man was gone. Maybe he'd been gone for years, and she'd just been too stubborn to see it. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said. Thomas nodded slowly. "I know." Damn. The church was packed. Every pew filled with familiar faces, neighbors who'd watched her grow up, merchants who'd sold her candy as a child, ranch families who'd shared Sunday dinners at the Whitmore table, back when there was still food to share. They'd all come to watch Thomas Whitmore's daughter marry a monster, because that's what Gideon Crow was, according to Black Hollow legend. Monster, killer. The devil who lived in the mountains. Clara had heard the stories her whole life. How he'd killed 3 men in a saloon fight down in Silver Creek. How he'd survived 2 weeks in a blizzard that killed everyone else in his hunting party. How he'd fought a grizzly bear with nothing but a knife and wore the scars to prove it. How he'd gunned down a man who cheated at cards, left him bleeding in the street, and rode out of town before the sheriff could ask questions. Some said he'd been an outlaw once, running from the law. Others claimed he'd been a soldier, the kind who did things during the war that no one wanted to remember. A few swore he'd killed his own partner over a woman, buried the body where no one would find it, and vanished into the northern mountains like smoke. The truth didn't matter. In a place like Black Hollow, reputation was reality. And Gideon Crow's reputation made grown men check their doors at night. Now Clara had to marry him. She walked down that aisle with her father's hand on her arm, feeling the weight of every stare. The women whispered behind gloved hands. The men shifted uncomfortably, not quite meeting her eyes. Children peeked between their parents' shoulders, wide-eyed and curious. At the altar, waiting, stood the man himself. Gideon Crow was bigger than she'd expected. Not tall exactly, maybe 6 feet, but broad across the shoulders in a way that suggested raw strength. He wore clean clothes, at least. Dark pants, a white shirt that looked new, a leather vest. His hair was dark and longer than was fashionable, pulled back from his face. His jaw was covered in a few days' worth of stubble, but it was the scars that caught her attention. One ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale and jagged, like something had tried to take his eye and nearly succeeded. Another curved along his jawline on the right side. His hands, resting at his sides, were marked with old burns and what looked like claw marks across the knuckles. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. Dangerous. Their eyes met as she reached the altar. His were gray, the color of storm clouds before snow. She'd expected cruelty there, or hunger, or the cold calculation of a man who just purchased a commodity. Instead, she saw something she couldn't quite name. Careful assessment, maybe. Or wariness. Like he was just as uncertain about this as she was. Which made no sense at all. The preacher cleared his throat. Reverend Matthews was sweating despite the cold, rushing through the ceremony like he wanted to be anywhere else. His voice shook slightly on the vows, and he stumbled over Gideon's name twice. Clara barely heard the words. Her mind was racing, cycling through options she didn't have. She could run, but where? Her father had already spent whatever money Crow had paid. The ranch was mortgaged to the bank. She had no relatives, no prospects, nowhere to go. She could refuse, but that wouldn't change the debt, wouldn't change the fact that her father had signed papers making her collateral. She was trapped, and everyone knew it. Do you, Clara Ann Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? The church held its breath. Clara looked at Gideon Crow. He stood perfectly still, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. Not demanding, not threatening, just waiting, giving her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. I do, she whispered. The collective exhale from the congregation sounded like wind through trees. And do you, Gideon Crow, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was deeper than she'd expected. Quiet, but it carried. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Matthews snapped his prayer book shut like he was closing a coffin. You may kiss the bride. This was it. The moment everyone had been waiting for. The moment the monster claimed his prize. Clara forced herself to stand still, to not flinch, to not show the fear that was crawling up her spine like ice water. She'd seen men kiss their brides before. Rough, possessive displays meant to show ownership, to mark territory, to remind everyone watching who held the power. She braced herself for it. Gideon stepped closer. She could smell pine and wood smoke on him, cold air and leather. He was close enough now that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair near his temples. Close enough that she could see the old violence written on his skin. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers were rough and calloused as they touched her cheek, work-worn hands that had probably killed, that had definitely hurt. But the touch itself was gentle, almost careful. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead. Not her lips, her forehead, like she was something precious instead of property. The church went dead silent. Clara's eyes flew open in shock. Around them, the congregation shifted and murmured in confusion. This wasn't what they'd expected. This wasn't the story they'd come to see. Gideon pulled back, meeting her startled gaze with something that might have been a question in his eyes. Then he turned toward the gathered crowd, offering her his arm like a gentleman instead of a captor. Clara took it because she didn't know what else to do. They walked back down that aisle together, while Black Hollow tried to figure out what the hell they'd just witnessed. The whispers started before they even reached the door, speculation and confusion rippling through the pews like wind through wheat. Outside, the November cold hit like a slap. The sky was gray with the promise of snow, and the wind cut through Clara's thin dress like it wasn't there. She shivered. Without a word, Gideon shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like leather and pine. Clara pulled it closer, confused by the gesture, by all of this, by the fact that the monster of Black Hollow was acting like something else entirely. There's a wagon, Gideon said, nodding toward the street where a sturdy-looking wagon waited, loaded with supplies. 2 horses stood hitched and ready, their breath fogging in the cold air. It's about 3 hours to the cabin. We should leave before the weather turns. Clara nodded mutely. Her father approached, looking smaller somehow in the gray daylight. He tried to meet her eyes and failed. Clara! Don't. She cut him off. Just don't. Thomas stood there awkwardly for a moment, then pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch that clinked softly. It's not much, he said quietly, but it's yours. In case you need it. Guilt money. Clara wanted to throw it in his face. Instead, she tucked it into the pocket of Gideon's coat without looking at it. Goodbye, Papa. She let Gideon help her into the wagon. His hands on her waist were brief and impersonal, lifting her like she weighed nothing. Then he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horses. Black Hollow disappeared behind them as they headed north toward the mountains. They rode in silence for the first hour. Clara sat rigid on the wagon seat, hyper-aware of the man beside her. Gideon kept his attention on the road, what little road there was. They'd left the main trail after 20 minutes, following a narrow track that climbed steadily upward through dense pine forest. The trees closed in around them, dark and watchful. Clara had lived in Black Hollow her whole life, but she'd never been this far into the mountains. Few people had. This was wilderness, the kind of country where people disappeared and were never found, where winters could trap you for months, where the rules of civilization didn't quite reach. Gideon Crow's country. You cold? His question startled her. It was the first time he'd spoken since they'd left town. I'm fine, she lied. He glanced at her, then reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket. Here. Clara took it, wrapping it around herself. The coat and blanket together helped, but the cold was seeping in through her thin dress and worn shoes. She'd never had proper winter clothes. They couldn't afford them. Gideon noticed her shivering. There's warmer clothes at the cabin, he said. Should fit well enough. Warmer clothes, Clara repeated slowly. You mean from before? A pause. No, I bought them for you. Last trip to Silver Creek. You bought me clothes. You'll need them. Winter's coming on hard this year. Clara didn't know what to say to that. The monster of Black Hollow had bought her winter clothes, had thought ahead to her needs, had planned for her comfort. None of this made sense. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why what? Why me? Why this? She gestured vaguely at the wagon, the mountains, everything. You could have, I don't know, hired help, found a woman who actually wanted to marry you. Why buy a debt and take someone who has no choice? Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the narrow trail ahead. The horses picked their way carefully over roots and rocks, their hooves making soft sounds in the pine needles. Your father sold you to the wrong man first, he finally said. Clara's blood went cold. What? Before he came to me, he made a deal with someone else, someone worse. Gideon's jaw tightened. I found out about it and made a better offer. Bought the debt before the other man could claim it. Who? But even as she asked, Clara felt a sick certainty settling in her stomach. Who was it? Silas Mercer. The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Silas Mercer, the richest man in 3 counties, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, who'd been visiting the Whitmore Ranch more and more over the past year, who'd looked at Clara in a way that made her skin crawl, who'd offered to help with her father's debts, to be a friend to the family, to take an interest in their affairs. She'd thought he wanted the ranch. Oh, God, Clara breathed. The visits, the loans. He was planning, Gideon finished grimly. Men like Mercer don't do anything by accident. He's been circling for months, waiting for your father to get desperate enough. But why would you care? Why would you stop him? Gideon's hands tightened on the reins. Because I know what Silas Mercer is. I know what he does to the women who end up in his house. His voice went flat, dangerous. And because he killed my brother. The forest around them seemed to grow quieter, like the trees themselves were listening. Your brother? Clara said carefully. Daniel. He was 17. Gideon stared straight ahead, but Clara could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. He worked on Mercer's ranch one summer, doing odd jobs. Saw something he shouldn't have. Asked questions he shouldn't have asked. What happened? They found his body in a ravine 3 miles from Mercer's property. Sheriff ruled it an accident, said Daniel must have fallen while riding drunk. Gideon's voice was deadly calm. My brother didn't drink, and the boot prints around where they found him belonged to 3 different men. Clara felt sick. Did they? No one was ever charged. Mercer had witnesses saying Daniel was drunk at the ranch party that night. Had a judge in his pocket who made sure the investigation went nowhere. Had the sheriff convinced that pursuing it would be bad for the community. The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint, so I pursued it myself. You went after them. I found the men who did it, all 3. Gideon's eyes were distant, remembering. 2 of them admitted it before they died. Said Mercer ordered it because Daniel had seen him with one of the girls from town, the one who disappeared last year. Mary Hutchins. Clara remembered Mary. Sweet girl, barely 18. She'd gone to work as a maid in Mercer's house and never came home. Her family was told she'd run off to California with some traveling salesman. There'd been rumors, whispers, but no proof. No investigation, just another girl who disappeared. The 3rd man? Clara asked quietly. Got away. Rode straight to Mercer and told him I was coming. Gideon's expression hardened. By the time I got there, Mercer had 20 men with rifles waiting, plus the sheriff telling me I'd hang if I set foot on Mercer's land. So I left, came up here, and I've been waiting. Waiting for what? For a chance to hurt him the way he hurt me. Gideon finally looked at her. When I heard he was planning to claim you through your father's debt, I saw my opening, so I paid more than he offered, bought the debt legally, married you before he could. Clara's mind was reeling. You married me for revenge. I married you to save you from Silas Mercer, Gideon corrected. The revenge is just making sure he knows he lost. But I'm still trapped, Clara said, hearing the edge in her own voice. I'm still property, just yours instead of his. Gideon pulled the horses to a stop. They'd reached a small clearing where the trail widened slightly, and he turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd left Black Hollow. You're not property, he said firmly, and you're not trapped. I'm married to you. I had no choice. You had worse choices. He held her gaze. I'm not going to hurt you, Clara. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to make you do anything you don't want to do. The marriage is legal. It protects you from Mercer, gives you a name and a home, but what happens in that home is up to you. What does that mean? It means you get this bed. I'll sleep near the fire. It means you eat first, always. It means your word matters in my house. What you say goes. His voice was steady, certain. It means I'm giving you time to figure out if you want to stay or if you want to leave. And if you choose to leave come spring, I'll help you however I can. Clara stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I've been caged, Gideon said quietly. Different kind of cage than yours, maybe, but I know what it feels like to have no choices, to be trapped by other people's decisions. He picked up the reins again. I won't do that to someone else. He clicked at the horses, and they started moving again. Clara sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile everything she'd thought she knew with what she was hearing. The monster of Black Hollow, the killer, the devil in the mountains. He was offering her freedom. Or was this just another kind of trap? A longer game? Pretty words before the reality set in? She didn't know. Couldn't know. But something in the way he'd spoken, the flat honesty, the lack of performance, made her think he might actually mean it. The trail grew steeper. The temperature dropped. Snow began to fall, small, hard flakes that stung when they hit exposed skin. Clara pulled the blanket tighter and watched the forest grow darker around them. After another hour of climbing, they emerged from the tree line into a high mountain valley. The land opened up into a clearing, and there, backed against the mountain itself, stood a cabin. It was bigger than Clara had expected. Sturdy logs, chinked tight against the wind, a stone chimney already smoking, a covered porch along the front, outbuildings, what looked like a stable, a smokehouse, a storage shed, corrals for animals, stacks of split firewood under tarps. This wasn't some desperate trapper's shack. This was a home. Gideon pulled the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake. Wait here, he said, then jumped down and disappeared inside. Clara sat alone in the falling snow, looking at this place that was supposed to be her prison. But it didn't look like a prison. It looked like somewhere a person could survive. Maybe even live. Gideon reappeared, carrying another heavy coat. Come on, he said, offering his hand. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." Clara hesitated, then took his hand and let him help her down. Her legs were stiff from the cold and the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, then released immediately. The cabin's interior was warm from the fire he'd built that morning before riding to town. One large main room with a stone fireplace, a proper iron stove for cooking, a table with chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A doorway led to what looked like a smaller bedroom. Everything was clean, organized, functional, and warm. So warm Clara almost cried from the relief of it. "Bedroom's through there," Gideon said, nodding at the doorway. "There's clothes in the chest. Should fit close enough. Get changed before you catch your death." Clara moved towards a bedroom on unsteady legs. Inside, she found a real bed with a thick mattress and wool blankets, a chest against the wall, a small window with real glass. She opened the chest and found what he'd promised: warm wool dresses in dark, practical colors, thick stockings, a heavy shawl. Everything looked new, or close to it. He'd really bought these for her, had planned for this. Clara changed quickly, peeling off the wet, thin dress and putting on the warmest clothes she'd worn in years. The dress was slightly too big, but the stockings fit perfectly, and the shawl was soft and heavy. She felt human again, protected. When she emerged, Gideon was at the stove making coffee. He glanced at her, nodded approval, then poured 2 cups. "You'll want to eat something," he said. "It's been a long day." Clara accepted the coffee, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. Gideon moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pulling out bread, cheese, dried meat. He set it on the table, then took a seat across from her. They ate in awkward silence. Clara kept stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the stories with the reality. This man who'd supposedly killed in cold blood was making sure she had enough to eat. Who'd fought a grizzly was offering her the softer chair. Who'd terrorized the territory was giving her the only bedroom. None of it fit. "You can ask," Gideon said suddenly. "What?" "Questions. You've got them. Might as well ask." Clara set down her coffee. "The stories about you, are they true?" "Which stories?" "The saloon fight in Silver Creek." "True. But it was self-defense. 3 men jumped me over a card game. I didn't start it, but I finished it." He took a bite of bread. 2 lived. 1 didn't. I left before the sheriff decided which version he believed." "The blizzard." "True. Hunting party got caught in an early storm. Everyone else panicked and scattered. I found a cave and waited it out." He shrugged. "Not heroic, just patient." "The grizzly." For the first time, something like humor flickered in his eyes. "Mostly true. I was tracking a wounded elk and got between a mother bear and her cub by accident. She didn't appreciate it. I had a knife. She had claws and teeth." He touched the scar on his face. "She won, but I survived. That's all that matters." "And the man you killed in the street?" The humor vanished. "He deserved it, but that's not a story for tonight." Clara nodded slowly. She was starting to understand something. The stories were true, mostly. But they weren't the whole truth. They were fragments, pieces of a larger picture that Black Hollow had arranged into the shape of a monster because monsters were easier to understand than complicated men. "Why do you live up here?" she asked. "Alone. Because I don't fit down there." Gideon gestured vaguely toward where the town would be, miles below and far away. "People see what they want to see. They wanted a monster, so that's what I became. Easier to give them what they expect than try to change their minds." "So you just left?" "After what happened with Mercer, yeah. Came up here, built this place, and stayed." He looked around the cabin. "It's quiet. No one bothers me. I hunt, trap, trade furs a few times a year. That's enough." "Lonely, though." "Sometimes." He met her eyes. "But lonely's better than being surrounded by people who hate you." Clara thought about Black Hollow, about the neighbors who'd watched her father drink away their future, who'd whispered about the Whitmores falling apart, who'd come to her wedding like it was a funeral. She thought about having a choice between that and this: cold mountains and silence, and a strange, scarred man who seemed to want nothing from her but her survival. Maybe lonely didn't sound so bad after all. They finished eating as the snow fell harder outside, piling up in the corners of the windows. Gideon stood and started clearing the dishes. You should rest, he said. It's been a long day. Clara wanted to argue, to insist on helping, but exhaustion was dragging at her bones. The warmth, the food, the sheer emotional weight of everything that had happened. It was all catching up with her. What about you? She asked. I'll bank the fire, tend the horses, check the shutters. He glanced at her. Go on. The bed's yours. Clara retreated to the bedroom and closed the door. She stood there for a moment, listening. She could hear Gideon moving around the main room, the quiet sounds of him working. Normal sounds, domestic sounds. Not threatening. She climbed into the bed fully dressed, pulling the heavy blankets over herself. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, feathers maybe. The blankets smelled like cedar and cold air. Outside the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin. But inside she was warm, safe. Maybe. Clara closed her eyes and tried not to think about what morning would bring. Tried not to wonder if this strange peace would last, or if it was just the calm before something worse. Tried not to imagine Silas Mercer's face when he learned what Gideon had done, because men like Mercer didn't lose gracefully. And when he came, and he would come, Clara was certain of that, the real test would begin. For now, though, she was warm and fed and alive. For now, that would have to be enough. Asi. Clara woke in darkness to the sound of Gideon moving around the main room. For a terrifying moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The wedding, the mountains, the cabin. Her first morning as Gideon Crow's wife. She lay still, listening. Gideon was being quiet, but she could hear the stove door opening, the soft crackle of kindling catching fire. The smell of coffee drifted through the door. Clara sat up slowly, pale gray light filtered through the small window. Dawn, or close to it. She'd slept through the entire night. Hadn't even heard Gideon come in to sleep near the fire like he'd promised. Part of her had waited for him to try something, to test the boundaries he'd set. But he hadn't. She got up, smoothed down her dress, and opened the bedroom door. Gideon stood at the stove, his back to her. He'd changed clothes, worn canvas pants, a heavy shirt, boots. His rifle leaned against the wall near the door, within easy reach. Always within reach, Clara realized. Even here, in his own home, he was ready for violence. Morning, he said without turning around. Coffee's ready. How did you know I was awake? Floorboards. He poured 2 cups. They talk. Clara accepted the coffee and took a seat at the table. Outside, the world was buried in white. At least 6 inches of snow had fallen overnight, and more was coming down steadily. Storm will last another day or two, Gideon said, following her gaze. We're snowed in for a bit. Snowed in, trapped together in this cabin with a man she didn't know, who'd bought her like livestock, who claimed he wouldn't hurt her, but who'd killed men before. Clara's hands tightened on her coffee cup. Gideon noticed. Of course he did. The man missed nothing. I need to check the animals, he said. Stable's got enough hay and water for a week, but I should make sure everyone's settled. Probably be about an hour. You need anything before I go? No? Help yourself to food. There's bread, eggs, dried meat in the cool box. Firewood next to the stove. He pulled on a heavy coat and hat. Keep the rifle near you while I'm gone. Clara blinked. What? The rifle. He nodded at the weapon by the door. Keep it close. Know how to use one? My father taught me when I was young, but then you remember enough. Gideon strapped on snowshoes. Probably won't need it, but probably isn't the same as certain. What would I need it for? Wolves, mostly. Sometimes a mountain lion comes down in deep snow looking for easy prey. And, he paused, and sometimes men are stupid enough to try climbing this mountain in weather like this. Mercer. He meant Mercer. You think he'll come? I think he's the kind of man who doesn't like losing. Gideon pulled on heavy gloves. But he's also the kind who values his own skin. He won't risk his neck in a blizzard, so we're safe for now. He opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air and swirling snow. But keep the rifle anyway. Then he was gone, disappearing into the white wall of falling snow. Clara sat alone in the warm cabin, staring at the rifle by the door. This was her life now. The days blurred together in a rhythm Clara had never known before. Wake at dawn. Coffee by the fire. Gideon checking the animals while she made breakfast. quiet meals where they spoke little, but the silence wasn't hostile. Then the work, endless, necessary work that kept them alive in a place that wanted them dead. Clara learned the cabin's routines faster than she'd expected. Learned where Gideon kept the flour and salt, which logs burned hottest, how to bank the fire at night so it wouldn't die but wouldn't waste fuel. Learned that he took his coffee black, ate quickly like a man who'd spent years not knowing when his next meal would come, and always left her the best portions of whatever they had. By the third day, the storm had passed. The world outside transformed into something from a dream, white and silent and vast. Gideon spent most of that day digging them out, clearing paths to the stable and outbuildings, checking the roof for damage. Clara watched him work from the window. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times, muscles working beneath his heavy coat as he threw shovel after shovel of snow aside. He never stopped for long, never complained, just worked until the job was done. When he came back inside, his face was red from the cold and exertion. "Need to check the trap-a-line tomorrow," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "Should only take half a day. You'll be all right here?" "I'll manage." He looked at her like he was trying to decide if that was true. "Show me you can load the rifle." "What?" "If I'm leaving you alone, I need to know you can protect yourself." He crossed to where the weapon leaned and brought it to the table. "Show me." Clara's hands shook slightly as she picked up the rifle. It had been years since her father had taught her to shoot, back when he was still the kind of father who taught his daughter things. She checked that it was unloaded, then went through the motions, opening the breech, checking the chamber, loading the cartridge. Her fingers fumbled the first try. The second went smoother. Gideon watched without comment until she finished. "Again," he said. She did it 3 more times until her hands stopped shaking and the movements came naturally. "Good," Gideon said finally. "Keep it loaded while I'm gone. Anyone comes up that trail you don't recognize, you don't answer the door, you don't call out. You just wait by the window with the rifle ready." "You really think someone would come all the way up here?" "I think Silas Mercer is the kind of man who makes poor decisions when his pride is hurt." Gideon's voice went hard. "And I think underestimating him is a good way to end up dead." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed listening to Gideon's breathing from the main room, steady and even. He'd kept his word. Hadn't tried to enter the bedroom, hadn't pressed her for anything, had treated her like a person instead of property. But the question gnawed at her. Why? Men didn't just do things like this. Didn't just save women they didn't know from other men's cruelty without wanting something in return. Didn't just offer protection and expect nothing. There had to be an angle she wasn't seeing. The next morning, Gideon left before dawn. Clara heard him moving around, heard the door open and close, heard silence settle over the cabin like a weight. She was alone. Really alone, for the first time since the wedding. Clara got up and made coffee, then stood at the window watching the empty white landscape. The trap line, Gideon had said. He'd be back by afternoon. She had maybe 6 hours to herself. 6 hours to think, to plan, to figure out what the hell she was going to do with the rest of her life. The rifle sat on the table where Gideon had left it. Clara picked it up, feeling its weight, then set it back down. She wasn't going to need it. No one was coming up that mountain in this snow. Not even Mercer was that stupid. She spent the morning cleaning, partly because the work needed doing and partly because it gave her something to do besides think. She swept the floors, organized the shelves, scrubbed the few dishes they'd used. In the bedroom, she noticed Gideon's few personal items, a razor and strop, a comb, a small leather-bound book on the windowsill. Clara picked up the book. It was a journal, she realized, old, with water-stained pages and a broken spine. She shouldn't look. She knew she shouldn't. She opened it anyway. The first few pages were in handwriting she didn't recognize, a younger, less controlled script. Someone else's journal that Gideon had kept. She flipped to the first entry and saw the name, Daniel Crow, his brother. Clara's stomach twisted. She should put it down. This was private, painful, none of her business. But she kept reading. The entries were simple. A teenage boy's observations about ranch work, horses, weather. Nothing profound, but there was joy in them, life in them. Daniel Crow had been happy, had been planning to save money for his own land someday, had been 17 and full of the kind of hope that came from not knowing how cruel the world could be. The final entry was dated 3 days before his death. Mr. Mercer's been acting strange lately. Saw him arguing with that girl from town in the stable. She was crying. He didn't see me watching, not sure if I should say something or mind my own business. Gideon always says to trust my gut. My gut says something's wrong. That was it. The last thing Daniel Crow ever wrote. Clara closed the journal with shaking hands and set it back exactly where she'd found it. She felt sick. That boy, because that's what he'd been, just a boy, had died for asking questions, for having a conscience, for trusting his gut, and Gideon had carried that journal for years, had kept his brother's last words close, had lived with that rage and grief and the knowledge that justice would never come through legal channels. No wonder he'd turned into what Black Hollow feared. Clara was sitting at the table staring at nothing when she heard the horses. At first she thought Gideon was back early, but the sound was wrong. Too many hoofbeats, coming too fast. She stood and moved to the window, her heart suddenly hammering. 3 riders were climbing the trail toward the cabin, and the man in front, even at this distance, was unmistakable. Silas Mercer had come. Clara's hands went cold. Gideon had said Mercer wouldn't be stupid enough to climb in this weather. But here he was, pushing his horse through knee-deep snow, 2 armed men flanking him. The rifle. Clara grabbed it from the table, her hands remembering the loading sequence Gideon had drilled into her. Check the chamber, load the cartridge, ready to fire. She positioned herself by the window where she could see without being easily seen. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could make out Mercer's face beneath his hat. He looked furious. They stopped about 20 yards from the cabin. "Mrs. Crow," Mercer's voice carried across the snow. "I know you're in there. Come out. We need to talk." Clara's finger found the trigger. She didn't answer. "I'm not here to hurt you," Mercer continued. His tone was reasonable, almost gentle, the kind of voice a man used when trying to calm a spooked horse. "Your father's debt was supposed to come to me. There's been a misunderstanding, legal issues with how Crow obtained the contract. If you come with me now, we can straighten this all out. Get you back to town where you belong." Legal issues. Clara almost laughed. There were no legal issues. Gideon had bought the debt fair and square. Mercer was just angry he'd been outbid. "I've got lawyers waiting in Black Hollow," Mercer said. "They'll explain everything. You don't have to stay up here with that animal. You've got options, Clara. Better options." The 2 men with him shifted in their saddles, hands resting casually near their weapons. Not threatening yet, but ready. Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. She could shoot, could put a bullet close enough to scare them off. But if she missed, if she hit one of them, if they decided to rush the cabin, she was alone. Gideon was miles away, and 3 armed men were outside her door. "I'm giving you 1 minute to come out," Mercer said, the gentleness fading from his voice. "After that, my men are coming in to get you. For your own protection, you understand. Can't leave a woman alone in the wilderness. Wouldn't be civilized." Clara's mind raced. She could barricade the door, but the men could break through or just wait for Gideon to return and ambush him. She could fire a warning shot, but that might just provoke them. She could hide, but where? The cabin had 1 room and a bedroom. There was nowhere to go. 30 seconds passed. "All right then," Mercer said. He nodded to his men. "Go get her. Try not to damage her too much." The 2 riders dismounted and started toward the cabin. Clara raised the rifle, aimed at the ground in front of the first man, and fired. The shot cracked across the valley like thunder. The man jumped back, cursing. Snow exploded where the bullet hit, inches from his boots. "Next one goes higher," Clara shouted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know how to use this thing." The men stopped, looking back at Mercer. The rancher's face had gone dark with rage. "You stupid girl," he called out. "You think 1 rifle makes a difference? You think Gideon Crow gives a damn about you? He bought you like cattle. That's all you are to him. Property. Then he's got property that shoots back." Clara fired again, this time closer to the second man. He dove behind his horse. "Enough of this," Mercer snapped. He pulled his own rifle from his saddle. "You want to play games? Fine. We'll burn you out. See how brave you are when the cabin's on fire." Clara's blood went ice cold. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But even as she thought it, one of the men was pulling something from his saddlebag. Lamp oil. They were really going to do it. She was trying to figure out if she could hit the man with the oil when she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap and the 3 men outside freeze. A wolf howl cutting across the valley. Except it wasn't a wolf. The sound came again, closer now. Mercer's horses started dancing nervously, sensing something wrong. Then Gideon Crow stepped out of the tree line. He must have heard the shots and run the whole way back. His face was flushed from exertion, his breath coming in clouds, but his hands were perfectly steady as he raised his rifle. "Get off my land," he said quietly. Mercer's men spun toward him, reaching for their weapons, but Gideon already had them sighted. "I wouldn't," Gideon said. "I can drop both of you before either gets a shot off. We all know it." The men hesitated, looking at Mercer. "This doesn't concern you anymore, Crow," Mercer said, trying to regain control. "The girl's contract was sold under false pretenses. I've got legal right." "You've got nothing," Gideon cut him off. "I paid every cent Thomas Whitmore owed, got the papers signed and filed at the territorial office. You can check with the clerk in Silver Creek if you want, but we both know you won't, because we both know there's no legal claim. I offered more. You offered after I'd already bought the debt. Doesn't count." Gideon took a step forward. "Now get on your horse and ride back down this mountain before I decide to collect on a different debt." "You threatening me?" "I'm stating facts." Gideon's voice went deadly calm. "You killed my brother. I've got witnesses who'll testify to it if I can keep them alive long enough to talk. I've got evidence. I've got a judge in Silver Creek who's not in your pocket. So yeah, Silas, you should leave. Because if you don't, I might forget I'm trying to be a better man and remember what I used to be instead." The threat hung in the cold air between them. Mercer stared at Gideon, calculation moving behind his eyes. He was weighing options, Clara realized, trying to figure out if he could kill Gideon here and make it look justified. But there were too many variables. A witness in the cabin, the distance, Gideon's reputation with a rifle. Finally, Mercer smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is." Gideon's finger rested on the trigger. "You just don't know it yet." Mercer jerked his reins, turning his horse. His men scrambled to mount up. Within seconds, they were riding back down the trail, churning up snow as they went. Gideon didn't lower his rifle until they disappeared into the trees. Then he turned toward the cabin, and Clara saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Fear. He took the porch steps 2 at a time and burst through the door. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine." Clara realized she was still holding her rifle, still standing in the same spot by the window. "I shot at them, scared them off until you got here." Gideon took the rifle from her hands and set it aside, then gripped her shoulders gently, looking her over like he was checking for injuries. "You're shaking." "I'm angry." And she was. The fear was draining away, replaced by pure rage. He was going to burn the cabin, with me inside. He said it like it was nothing. That's who Silas Mercer is. Gideon released her shoulders and started pacing, agitated energy rolling off him. "That's what I tried to tell people in Black Hollow, but he's got money, so they don't see it, don't want to see it. He said you only bought me like cattle. He's a liar." "Is he?" Clara heard her voice rising but couldn't stop it. "You paid money for my father's debt. That debt included me. How is that different?" Gideon stopped pacing and looked at her. "The difference is, I'm giving you a choice. He never would." "A choice to do what? Stay here and hide? Wait for him to come back with more men? Live my whole life looking over my shoulder? A choice to be safe." Gideon's voice rose to match hers. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to marry a stranger and drag her into my war with Mercer? I did it because the alternative was watching another person disappear into that bastard's house and knowing I could have stopped it. So this is about your guilt, about your brother. It's about doing the right thing for once instead of just killing people." The words exploded out of Gideon, raw and unfiltered. "It's about trying to save someone instead of avenging someone. It's about—" He cut himself off, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Clara felt tears burning her eyes and hated it. Hated that she was crying, hated that she was scared, hated that her father had put her in this position, hated that Gideon Crow was trying to be noble and making everything more complicated. "I read your brother's journal," she said quietly. Gideon went very still. "What?" "This morning, I found it in the bedroom. I shouldn't have, but I did." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "He was just a kid. He was good. And Mercer killed him for no reason except that Daniel saw something he shouldn't have." "Yeah." Gideon's voice was rough. "That's what Mercer does. That's what he's always done. And you've been carrying that journal for years. It's all I have left of him. Clara looked at this scarred, dangerous man who'd saved her from a monster and realized something that should have been obvious from the start. Gideon Crow wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to be human again, trying to find a way back from whatever dark place Daniel's death had sent him to, and she was part of that attempt. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your brother. About all of it." Gideon shook his head. "Not your fault. And I'm sorry I yelled." "You've got a right to yell. This is a mess." He ran a hand through his hair. "But Mercer coming up here changes things. He's not going to let this go. He'll come back with more men, or he'll try something else. I need to figure out our next move." "Our next move?" Clara repeated. "You said our. You're my wife. That makes it our problem now." Something about the way he said it, matter of fact, like it was just obvious, made Clara's chest tighten. He really meant it. This wasn't about ownership or property or even revenge anymore. Somewhere in the past few days, it had become about partnership. "What do we do?" she asked. Gideon was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "We need leverage, something that makes Mercer back off permanently. You said you had evidence, witnesses." "I do, but they're scattered. Some are too scared to talk. Others are in places where Mercer can get to them." He started pacing again. "I need time to bring it all together. Need to get the right people to the right judge before Mercer can interfere." "How long?" "Couple weeks, maybe, if we can stay alive that long." Clara thought about Mercer's face, about the cold calculation in his eyes. 2 weeks was a long time to hide from a man who had resources and connections and no conscience. "He's not going to wait 2 weeks," she said. "He'll come back sooner, with more men." "I know." Gideon stopped at the window, looking out at the trail. "Which is why I need to go to Silver Creek tomorrow. Talk to Sheriff Hayes, make sure he knows what happened here. Get things moving legally so Mercer can't just make us disappear. And leave me here alone again? I'll be back before dark. And this time," he turned to face her, "this time you're taking both rifles. You're barricading the door. And if anyone comes within 100 yards of this cabin, you start shooting and don't stop until I get back. That's your plan? Hope he doesn't attack while you're gone? You got a better one?" Clara wanted to argue, to demand a better solution, to insist there had to be another way. But she'd seen Mercer's face. She knew what kind of man he was now. And she understood that sometimes the only choice was between bad options and worse ones. "Fine," she said. "But you're teaching me to shoot better before you leave. If I'm defending this place alone, I want to hit what I aim at." For the first time since the riders had left, something like respect crossed Gideon's face. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "First light." That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind. Gideon was in the main room, probably not sleeping either. She could hear him moving occasionally, checking the windows, feeding the fire, keeping watch. Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what her life had been like a week ago. The cramped house in Black Hollow, her father's drinking, the constant worry about money, about food, about what would happen when the debts finally came due. She thought that was the worst her life could get. Now she was married to a stranger, hiding in the mountains from a man who wanted to burn her alive, learning to shoot rifles and barricade doors and live like someone in a war. But somehow, and this was the part that confused her most, she didn't feel trapped anymore. Scared, yes. Angry, definitely. Uncertain about everything. But not trapped, because Gideon kept giving her choices, kept asking instead of demanding, kept treating her like someone whose opinion mattered. And that was more than her own father had ever done. Clara must have slept eventually because she woke to gunshots. She bolted upright, heart pounding, then realized the shots were coming from outside. She grabbed the dress Gideon had given her and threw it on, then rushed to the main room. Gideon stood on the porch, firing at targets he'd set up in the snow. He lowered the rifle when he saw her. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you, but we're losing daylight, and you need practice." Clara stepped out into the cold morning air. Gideon had set up 3 targets, broken boards with rough circles drawn on them in charcoal, at different distances. "Closest one's 20 yards, he said. Middle's 40, far one's 60. You need to be able to hit all 3. Clara took the rifle he offered. It was heavier than she remembered. "Show me your stance," Gideon said. Clara positioned herself like her father had taught her years ago. Gideon immediately started making adjustments, shifting her feet, raising her elbow, changing her grip. "Breathe out before you shoot," he said. "Don't hold your breath, and don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze it smooth." Clara aimed at the closest target and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up snow 2 feet to the left. "Again," Gideon said. She fired 15 times at that first target before she finally hit it. Her shoulder was aching from the recoil, and her ears were ringing despite Gideon warning her about the noise. But she'd hit it. "Good," Gideon said. "Now do it again." They spent 2 hours in the snow. By the end, Clara could hit the close target regularly, the middle target occasionally, and the far target once. Her arms were shaking from exhaustion, and she was pretty sure her shoulder was going to be one giant bruise. But she could shoot. "That'll do," Gideon said finally. "You're not going to win any competitions, but you can defend yourself. That's what matters." Inside, Clara sank into a chair while Gideon made coffee. Her hands were still trembling slightly. "You did well out there," he said, setting a cup in front of her. "Most people can't hit anything their first day. My father taught me the basics. Long time ago." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Before he fell apart." "What happened to him, if you don't mind me asking?" Clara was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to say. "My mother died when I was 12, fever. Papa tried to keep going, but..." She shrugged. "Some people break when they lose someone they love. He started drinking, started gambling, started making bad decisions. By the time I was old enough to see it clearly, we were already drowning." "And no one helped?" "We were Whitmores, pride of Black Hollow, once upon a time. Papa couldn't admit we were struggling, wouldn't ask for help, just kept pretending everything was fine while he sold off everything we owned to cover his debts." She took a sip of coffee. "I tried to stop him, tried to take over the ranch books, manage the money. But you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." Gideon nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know that feeling." "Your brother? Daniel thought he could fix everything. Thought if he just worked hard enough, saved enough money, built enough of a future, our old man would stop drinking and start giving a damn." Gideon stared into his coffee. He was wrong. Some people are too far gone. They sat in silence for a while, two people who'd learned the same hard lesson about broken fathers and shattered families. "I'm leaving in an hour," Gideon said finally. "Should be back by sunset. You remember everything I told you? Barricade the door. Both rifles loaded. Don't open for anyone. And if someone tries to force their way in, shoot through the door first, ask questions later." "Good." He stood and started gathering supplies, ammunition, dried meat, a canteen. "There's food in the cold box. Fire's got enough wood for the day. You'll be all right." Clara wanted to tell him to be careful, wanted to say something about how she was trusting him to come back, about how she was starting to understand that maybe he was different from the stories. Instead, she just said, "Don't do anything stupid in Silver Creek." Gideon almost smiled. Stupid's relative. Then he was gone, riding down the mountain on his big gray horse, leaving Clara alone with 2 rifles and a cabin full of shadows. The day crawled by. Clara tried to keep busy, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, organizing supplies that were already organized, cooking food she didn't have appetite for. Anything to keep her mind off the fact that she was alone, that Mercer could come back, that Gideon might not return. By mid-afternoon, she was sitting by the window with a rifle across her lap, watching the trail. By late afternoon, she was imagining scenarios. Gideon ambushed on the road, Mercer's men waiting in Silver Creek, the sheriff refusing to help. A dozen different ways this could go wrong. When the sun started sinking toward the horizon and Gideon still hadn't returned, Clara's hands started shaking again. What if something had happened? What if Mercer had gotten to him? What if she was sitting here alone while Gideon was lying dead in a ditch somewhere? What would she do then? The question terrified her more than she wanted to admit. A week ago, Gideon Crow had been a stranger, a monster from stories, someone to fear. Now he was the only thing standing between her and Silas Mercer, and maybe, something more than that. The light was almost gone when she finally heard hoofbeats. Clara grabbed the rifle and positioned herself by the window, her heart hammering. One horse, coming fast. Please let it be him. Please let it be. Gideon came into view, riding hard up the trail. He looked exhausted but whole. Clara's legs nearly gave out from relief. She set the rifle down and unbarricaded the door, pulling it open just as Gideon reached the porch. "You're late," she said, trying to sound annoyed instead of terrified. "Ran into complications." He dismounted stiffly and led his horse toward the stable. "Give me 10 minutes to settle the horse, then I'll explain everything." Clara waited, forcing herself to breathe normally, to stop shaking, to pretend she hadn't spent the last 2 hours convinced he was dead. When Gideon finally came inside, he looked grim. "Bad news?" Clara asked. "Mixed news." He pulled off his coat and hat. "Sheriff Hayes is willing to help. Says he never liked Mercer, but never had enough evidence to move against him. If I can bring him witnesses and proof, he'll make arrests." "That's good." "Yeah, but the witnesses I need are scattered across 3 counties. Some of them are in hiding, some are working on Mercer's ranch where I can't get to them, and all of them are scared." Gideon ran a hand through his hair. "Getting them to talk is going to take time. Time we might not have. Mercer won't wait." "No, he won't." Gideon met her eyes. "Hayes thinks we've got maybe a week before Mercer tries something bigger. He can't afford to let this stand, can't let people think he lost to me." "So what do we do?" "We prepare." Gideon's jaw set. "And if Mercer comes back, we make damn sure he regrets it." The week that followed felt like waiting for a storm they could see building on the horizon, but couldn't outrun. Gideon spent his days fortifying the cabin, reinforcing the door with extra beams, boarding up one of the windows to create a better defensive position, stockpiling ammunition and supplies in case they got trapped in a siege. Clara watched him work with a growing knot in her stomach, understanding that all these preparations meant one thing. Gideon expected violence, and he expected it soon. She asked him once, on the 3rd day, why they didn't just leave. Pack up, head to Silver Creek, stay with the sheriff until this blew over. Gideon had looked at her like she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. "Running puts us in the open," he said. "On the trail, Mercer's men could pick us off easy. Up here, we've got cover, high ground, and walls. We leave, we lose every advantage. We also get trapped if he brings enough men. He won't bring an army. Too obvious. Too many witnesses." Gideon hammered another board into place across the window. "He'll come with 4, maybe 5 men, enough to overwhelm us, not enough to look like a war party." "And you think we can hold off 5 men?" "I think I can drop 3 before they reach the porch, and you can handle the rest if you don't panic." He said it like he was discussing the weather, calm and certain. "But it won't come to that. Mercer's not stupid. He'll test us first, send someone to scout, see how we're set up. When that scout doesn't come back, he'll know we're ready." Clara wanted to ask what happened to the scout, but she already knew. Gideon wasn't planning to let anyone report back. On the 4th day, it snowed again. Big wet flakes that piled up fast and made the trail nearly impassable. Clara stood at the window, watching it come down, and felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. The snow would slow Mercer, buy them more time, but it also meant they were even more isolated, even more cut off from help if things went wrong. That evening, she was making dinner when Gideon suddenly went rigid at the table. He'd been cleaning his rifle, but now his hands were still. His head tilted slightly like he was listening to something Clara couldn't hear. "What is it?" she asked. "Put the stew off the heat and get your rifle." Clara's stomach dropped. "Someone's coming?" "Don't know yet, but the horses are nervous." He stood and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The snow had stopped an hour ago, leaving everything silent and white. Could be a wolf, could be something else. Clara grabbed her rifle from where it leaned by the door and checked the load with hands that only shook a little. Gideon had drilled her every day, and the movements were becoming automatic now. Load, check, ready. They waited in tense silence. Minutes crawled by. Clara's arms started aching from holding the rifle ready, but she didn't lower it. Then Gideon swore under his breath. "What?" "There." He pointed toward the tree line, where Clara could just barely make out a shape moving through the shadows. "Single rider, coming slow." "One of Mercer's scouts?" "Maybe. Or maybe someone who got lost and needs help." Gideon's voice was tight. "Either way, we find out before they get close." He opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. Clara followed, staying in the doorway where she had cover but could still see. The rider emerged from the trees into the moonlight, and Clara's breath caught. It was a woman. She was slumped in the saddle, barely holding on. Her horse was limping, exhausted. As they watched, the woman slid sideways and nearly fell before catching herself on the saddle horn. "Help!" she called weakly. "Please, I need help!" Gideon didn't lower his rifle. "Who are you?" "My name's Elizabeth. Elizabeth Chen. I worked at Mercer's ranch." The woman's voice was raw, desperate. "Please, I've been riding for hours. I'm freezing." "Why'd you leave Mercer's ranch?" "Because he's planning to kill you, both of you, tomorrow night." Elizabeth swayed again. "I heard him talking to his men. I couldn't let it happen without warning you, so I took a horse and ran." Clara looked at Gideon. His face was unreadable, but she could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This could be legitimate, or it could be exactly the kind of trap Mercer would set. Send a woman, someone they might trust, someone who could get close and report back on their defenses. "Gideon," Clara said quietly, "she's freezing. Look at her." "I see her," but he still didn't lower the rifle. "Elizabeth Chen, you say you worked at Mercer's ranch. Doing what?" "Cooking, cleaning, whatever he needed." Elizabeth's teeth were chattering now. "Please, I'm not armed. I'm not a threat. I just want to get warm." Gideon studied her for another long moment. Then he looked back at Clara. If it's a trick, we'll deal with it. But if it's not, and we let her freeze, we're no better than Mercer." That settled it. Gideon lowered his rifle slightly, but kept it ready. "All right, come forward, slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Elizabeth half fell off her horse and stumbled through the snow toward the cabin. Up close, Claire could see she was maybe 30, Chinese, with frostbitten cheeks and ice crusting her hair. She was wearing a thin coat that was completely inadequate for mountain winter, and her hands were wrapped in rags instead of proper gloves. "Inside," Gideon said. Clara, check her for weapons." Clara led Elizabeth into the cabin while Gideon stayed on the porch, watching the trail. The woman was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Clara sat her by the fire and quickly patted her down, checking for guns or knives. Nothing. "She's clean," Clara called. Gideon came inside but positioned himself near the door, rifle still in hand. His eyes never left Elizabeth. Clara wrapped a blanket around the woman's shoulders and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her frozen hands. Elizabeth drank it like it was the first warm thing she'd had in days. Maybe it was. "Talk," Gideon said, "and make it fast. How do I know Mercer didn't send you?" Elizabeth looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain to be faked. "Because if Mercer knew I was here, I'd already be dead, just like Mary Hutchins, just like the others." The cabin went silent, except for the crackling fire. "You knew Mary?" Clara asked quietly. "We shared a room in the servant quarters. She was so young, so scared." Elizabeth's hands tightened on the coffee cup. "He started calling for her at night. Private meetings, he called them. She'd come back crying, with bruises she tried to hide. I told her to run, but she said she couldn't. Her family needed the money she was sending home." "What happened to her?" Gideon's voice was cold. "She got pregnant, told me she was going to report it to the sheriff, make Mercer take responsibility." Elizabeth closed her eyes. 3 days later, they said she ran away to California, but I saw them loading something wrapped in canvas into a wagon that night, and I saw the blood on the floor of Mercer's study that someone tried to scrub away. Clara felt sick. "You didn't report it? To who? The sheriff Mercer pays off? The judge who owes him money? The town that depends on his ranch for work?" Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. "I'm Chinese, an immigrant, a servant. Who's going to believe me over Silas Mercer?" Gideon finally lowered his rifle. "Why now? Why risk running after all this time?" "Because I heard what he's planning, and I've already got too much blood on my conscience." Elizabeth set down her coffee cup. "He's been recruiting men. Not his usual ranch hands. These are guns from Silver Creek. Dangerous men. He's paying them to come up here tomorrow night and burn you out. Kill Crow, take Clara back to his ranch. Make it look like bandits did it." "How many men?" Gideon asked. 6, plus Mercer himself probably. He wants to watch." Clara's hands went cold. 7 men against 2. Those weren't odds anyone could survive. "You're sure about the timing?" Gideon asked. "Tomorrow night?" That's what he told them. Said the moon would be bright enough to ride by and the snow would cover their tracks by morning. Elizabeth looked between them. "I left as soon as I heard. Took a horse and whatever food I could grab. I figured if I could warn you, maybe you'd have time to get out. Ride to Silver Creek, get help from the sheriff. Can't do that, Gideon said. Then you're going to die. Elizabeth's voice rose. You can't fight 7 men. No one can. Maybe not in a fair fight. Gideon was already moving, grabbing his coat. But who said anything about fair? Clara stepped in front of him. What are you planning? Setting a trap. His eyes were hard, focused. If Mercer wants to come hunting, fine. But he's about to learn what it's like to be the prey. Gideon? Clara, listen to me. He gripped her shoulders. We've got maybe 18 hours. I can use that. But I need to move now, and I need you to trust me. Trust you to do what? Something I'm good at. The old darkness flickered in his eyes. Something I swore I wouldn't do again, but desperate times and all that. Clara understood then. He was talking about becoming what Black Hollow had always feared. The killer. The monster. There has to be another way, she said. There's not. You know there's not. He released her shoulders. You've got Elizabeth here now. 2 rifles, 2 people who can shoot. You can hold the cabin if anyone gets past me. Past you? Where are you going? Hunting. Gideon grabbed ammunition, his hunting knife, supplies Clara couldn't identify in the dim light. I'll be back before they arrive. But if something goes wrong, you barricade that door and you don't open it for anyone. Not even me. Understand? No, I don't understand. You can't just... Clara. He stopped and looked at her, really looked at her. I know what I'm asking. I know this is crazy, but it's our only shot. And I'm not letting Mercer take you. I'm not letting what happened to Mary happen to you. So I'm going to do what needs doing, and I need you to be here, safe, when I get back. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand a better plan, a safer plan, any plan that didn't involve Gideon going out alone into the dark to face 7 men. But she'd learned enough about him this past week to know that once Gideon Crow made a decision, nothing would change his mind. Come back, she said finally. Whatever you do out there, you come back. Something shifted in his expression. I will. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night like smoke. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the darkness swallow him, and realized with a jolt that somewhere along the way she'd started caring whether this scarred, dangerous man lived or died. Elizabeth spoke from behind her. Is he really going to try to stop 7 men alone? Clara closed the door and dropped the bar across it. Yes. That's suicide. Maybe. Clara picked up her rifle and checked the load again, hands moving automatically through the sequence Gideon had taught her. But if anyone can pull it off, it's him. You sound like you believe that. I do. And Clara was surprised to realize it was true. She'd seen Gideon move through these mountains like he was part of them. Seen the way he noticed everything, calculated distances and angles and possibilities without seeming to think about it. Seen the cold certainty in his eyes when he talked about protecting what was his. If anyone could turn the tables on Silas Mercer, it was Gideon Crow. Tell me about the men Mercer hired, Clara said, turning to Elizabeth. What do you know about them? Not much. They came to the ranch 3 days ago, rough types. The kind who'll do anything for money. Elizabeth wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. I heard Mercer promising them $100 each. That's a fortune for men like that. Did you hear any names? One called himself Rake. Another was Dutch, I think. The rest I don't know. Clara filed the information away. Not that it mattered much. A name didn't change the fact that 7 armed men were planning to kill them tomorrow night. She spent the next hour getting Elizabeth settled, found her dry clothes, made her eat something hot, set her up in the bedroom with extra blankets. The woman was exhausted, physically and emotionally, and she fell asleep almost immediately. Clara returned to the main room and sat by the fire, rifle across her lap, listening to the night, waiting. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went, 1 in the morning, 2. Clara fed the fire, checked the windows, and tried not to imagine all the ways Gideon could be dying out there in the dark. At 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps on the porch. Clara grabbed her rifle and positioned herself by the door. Who's there? It's me, Gideon's voice. But that didn't mean anything. Mercer's men could have captured him, could be using him to get her to open the door. Prove it, Clara called. Tell me something only you would know. A pause. Then, you read Daniel's journal. You told me about it the day Mercer first came up here. You said he was just a kid who was good, and you were right. Clara's hands shook with relief. That was him. Really him. She dropped the bar and pulled the door open. Gideon stood on the porch, and Clara's breath caught. He was covered in blood. His hands, his coat, his face, all streaked with red that looked black in the moonlight. Are you hurt? She grabbed his arm, pulling him inside. Not my blood. Clara slammed the door shut and barred it again, then turned to look at him properly. His eyes were distant, hollow, the look of a man who'd just done something he couldn't take back. How many? She asked quietly. 3. His voice was flat. The scouts Mercer sent ahead to watch the cabin. Make sure we were still here. They won't be reporting back. You killed them. Yes. Clara knew she should be horrified, should be afraid of this man who'd just admitted to killing 3 people in cold blood, but all she felt was a grim satisfaction that the odds had just shifted in their favor. That leaves 4 for tomorrow, she said, plus Mercer. Gideon moved to the wash basin and started scrubbing the blood from his hands. The water turned pink, then red. But they don't know their scouts are dead yet. So when they ride up here tomorrow night, they'll be expecting an easy fight. They'll be wrong. What did you do with the bodies? Made sure they won't be found until spring thaw. He dried his hands on a rag. We need to sleep, both of us. Tomorrow's going to be hard. But neither of them slept much. Clara lay in the bed in the next room, listening to Gideon move around the main room, and wondered what it cost a man to kill. Wondered if Gideon was thinking about his brother, about Mary Hutchins, about all the people Mercer had destroyed over the years. Wondered if that made it easier or harder to pull the trigger. Dawn came gray and cold. Clara found Gideon already awake, standing at the window with his coffee, watching the trail. They'll come at full dark, he said without turning. Mercer's not stupid enough to approach in daylight where we can see them coming. So we have all day to prepare. Yeah. He finally looked at her. You ready for this? Clara thought about everything that had led her to this moment. Her father's debts, the forced marriage, the mountain cabin, learning to shoot, facing down Mercer's men. All of it had been building to this, one last stand against a man who thought he could take whatever he wanted. I'm ready, she said. They spent the day turning the cabin into a fortress. Gideon showed Clara the best firing positions, how to use the furniture for cover, where to aim to stop someone coming through the door. Elizabeth woke around noon and insisted on helping despite her exhaustion. I didn't ride all night just to hide while you fight, she said, when Clara tried to make her rest. Give me a rifle and show me how to use it. So they had 3 shooters, 3 rifles, and a plan that hinged on Mercer's men being overconfident and sloppy. They'll expect you to be alone, Gideon told Clara. One woman, probably terrified, definitely not a threat. They won't know about Elizabeth. So when they come through that door, you surprise them. Shoot fast, shoot center mass, and don't stop until they're down. And where will you be? Outside, in the dark, picking them off before they reach the porch. His eyes were cold, but some will get through. They always do. That's when you hold the line. As afternoon faded into evening, Clara found herself thinking about her father, wondering if he knew what he'd set in motion when he sold her to pay his debts, wondering if he cared that his daughter was about to fight for her life against men who wanted to kill her. Probably not. Thomas Whitmore had stopped caring about anything except his next drink years ago. But Clara cared. She cared about living, about not becoming another Mary Hutchins, another body wrapped in canvas and disposed of like garbage, about proving that she was more than just property to be bought and sold. And maybe, just maybe, she cared about the man who'd given her a chance to fight back. Full dark came at 7. Gideon extinguished all the lights in the cabin except one small lamp in the bedroom, making it look like someone was getting ready for bed. Then he positioned Clara and Elizabeth at opposite windows with clear fields of fire. Remember, he said, let them get close. Don't shoot until you're sure of the target. And if I go down, you don't try to save me. You hold this cabin and you wait for Sheriff Hayes. He knows to come if he doesn't hear from me by tomorrow. Gideon. Promise me, Clara. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't going to just let him die if things went bad. But his eyes were serious, almost pleading. I promise, she lied. Gideon nodded, apparently satisfied. Then he did something Clara didn't expect. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, just like he had at the wedding. A gentle, almost protective gesture that made her chest tight. "Stay alive," he said quietly. Then he slipped out the back door and disappeared into the darkness. Clara took her position by the window, rifle ready, and waited. 8 o'clock passed. 9. 10. Elizabeth shifted nervously at her window. "Maybe they're not coming." "They're coming," Clara said. She could feel it in her bones, that certainty that violence was approaching. "They're just being careful." At 10:30, the horses whinnied. Clara's grip tightened on her rifle. "Get ready." They came out of the tree line like ghosts, 4 riders moving fast through the snow, spreading out as they approached the cabin. Clara couldn't see Mercer, but she knew he was back there somewhere, watching. The riders dismounted about 30 yards out, leaving their horses, approaching on foot. Smart. Made them smaller targets. Clara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. 4 men, 3 shooters, and Gideon somewhere in the dark. The first gunshot cracked across the valley, and one of the approaching men dropped. Gideon. The other 3 dove for cover, shouting. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness as they returned fire blindly, not knowing where the shot had come from. Another crack. Another man down, screaming. 2 left now, plus whoever was in the trees. The remaining men rushed the cabin, firing as they came. Bullets slammed into the log walls, shattered a window. Elizabeth screamed but held her position. Clara waited until the first man hit the porch, then fired. The rifle's recoil slammed into her shoulder. The man stumbled, clutching his side, but kept coming. Clara worked the bolt and fired again. This time he went down and stayed down. The second man was at the door trying to kick it in. The heavy bar held, but the wood was splintering. Elizabeth fired through the window, catching him in the shoulder. He spun, returned fire. The bullet passed so close to Clara's head she felt the air move. She fired again. Missed. The man at the door was still kicking, the wood starting to give. Clara could see the fury on his face, the determination. He was going to get through. He was going to... A gunshot from behind him. The man's head snapped forward and he collapsed. Gideon stepped onto the porch, rifle smoking. Blood streaked his face from a cut above his eye, but he was alive. 2 more in the trees, he said. Stay inside. Then the night exploded with gunfire. Someone had been waiting, watching. Bullets tore through the air where Gideon had been standing. He dove behind the water trough as the porch disintegrated into splinters. Clara couldn't see who was shooting, couldn't see anything except muzzle flashes in the darkness. She fired toward them anyway, working the bolt as fast as she could, trying to give Gideon cover. The shooting stopped. Silence fell like a weight. Clara's ears were ringing. Smoke burned her eyes. She could hear Elizabeth crying quietly, could hear her own ragged breathing, could hear nothing from outside. "Gideon?" she called. No answer. "Gideon!" Still nothing. Clara's blood went cold. She moved toward the door, rifle ready, terror and rage warring in her chest. "Don't," Elizabeth said. "Don't go out there," he said. "I don't care what he said." Clara dropped the bar and yanked the door open. The porch was a mess of blood and splintered wood. The body of the man Gideon had shot lay crumpled by the steps. But Gideon himself was there, behind the water trough, pressed against the cabin wall, alive but pinned down. And standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the moonlight, was Silas Mercer. He had a rifle aimed directly at Gideon. "Enough!" Mercer called out. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "You've killed 5 of my men, Crow. Impressive. But it's over now. Stand up. Let's finish this properly." Gideon didn't move. "Or I can shoot you where you sit," Mercer continued. "Your choice. Either way, you're dead. But at least if you stand, you die like a man instead of a dog." Clara raised her rifle, trying to sight Mercer in the darkness. But he was too far, and she wasn't good enough for this shot. If she missed, he'd kill Gideon before she could reload. "I'm standing up," Gideon said finally. "But when I do, we settle this fair. You and me, man to man. No rifles." Mercer laughed. "You think I'm stupid enough to give you a fair fight? I think you're a coward who hides behind money and hired guns and other people's blood." Gideon's voice cut across the clearing like a blade. "I think you've never fought your own battles in your entire worthless life. and I think everyone knows it." The silence that followed was electric. "You want to prove me wrong?" Gideon said. "Then put down the rifle and face me. Show the people of Black Hollow that Silas Mercer is more than just a rich man playing at being dangerous." Mercer stood there, weighing his options. He could shoot Gideon now, end this, and right away. But Gideon's words had found their mark. Mercer's pride, his ego, his need to be seen as powerful. "Fine," Mercer said finally. He set his rifle against a tree and drew a knife from his belt. "Knives, then. Just you and me." Gideon stood slowly, painfully. Blood ran down his left arm from a wound Clara hadn't seen, but his right hand was steady as he drew his own knife. "Gideon, no!" Clara shouted. "You're hurt!" He didn't even look at her. All his attention was on Mercer now, the two men circling each other in the snow like animals preparing to kill. They moved fast when they clashed, faster than Clara would have thought possible. Steel flashed in the moonlight. Mercer was good, she realized with sick dread. Really good. Trained, probably. Gideon was bigger and stronger, but he was bleeding, exhausted from a night of fighting. They broke apart, circling again. Both men were breathing hard now. "I'm going to kill you," Mercer said conversationally. "Then I'm going to take that girl you married, and I'm going to make sure she knows every day for the rest of her life that you died for nothing." Gideon's response was to lunge. They crashed together in the snow, rolling, knives seeking flesh. Clara saw blood spray, heard someone grunt in pain, couldn't tell who was winning. Then they were on their feet again, and Gideon had the upper hand. He was forcing Mercer back, driving him toward the trees. But Mercer was still fighting, still dangerous, still... A gunshot. Both men froze. Clara lowered her rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. The bullet had passed between them, so close that both men had felt it. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Step back, Gideon." "Clara, I said step back!" Gideon backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off Mercer. Mercer looked at Clara, calculation moving behind his eyes. "You won't shoot me. Women don't have the stomach for it." "You tried to burn me alive," Clara said. "You killed Mary Hutchins. You killed Daniel Crow. You've destroyed lives for years because you thought no one would stop you." "And no one has," Mercer said. He actually smiled. "Because I'm too powerful, too connected. Even if you shoot me now, my people will make sure you hang for it." "Maybe," Clara said, "or maybe they'll call it self-defense, a woman protecting her home from a man who came to kill her. You don't have proof. I have Elizabeth Chen. She heard everything. She'll testify." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "And I have you, standing here with a knife in your hand and 5 dead men who work for you scattered around my property. I think that's all the proof anyone needs." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mercer's face. "So here's what's going to happen," Clara continued. "You're going to drop that knife. You're going to get on your horse, and you're going to ride down this mountain and straight to Sheriff Hayes' office. You're going to confess to everything, Daniel, Mary, all of it. And if you don't, I'm going to hunt you down myself and put a bullet in you while you sleep." "You're bluffing," Clara fired again, the bullet kicking up snow at Mercer's feet. "That's your last warning," she said. Mercer stared at her, weighing his options. Clara could see the moment he realized she meant it, that the terrified girl from Black Hollow was gone, replaced by someone who would pull that trigger without hesitation. The knife hit the snow with a soft thud. "This isn't over," Mercer said. "Yeah, it is." Gideon's voice was rough but certain. "Because if Sheriff Hayes doesn't hang you for murder, I will, and you know I mean it." Mercer looked between them, then turned and walked toward his horse. He mounted slowly, his movements stiff with rage and humiliation. "I'll see you both dead," he said. "You can try," Clara replied. "But next time I won't miss." They watched him ride away, disappearing into the darkness. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded completely did Clara lower her rifle. Her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. Gideon was beside her in an instant, catching the rifle, wrapping his good arm around her shoulders. "You did it," he said quietly. "You sent him running." "I should have shot him." "No." Gideon turned her to face him. "You did exactly the right thing. He'll confess or he'll run, and either way, he's finished. You didn't have to kill him to beat him." Clara looked up at this scarred, dangerous man who'd been willing to die to protect her, and felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't about survival anymore. wasn't about convenience or avoiding a worse fate. This was something else entirely. "You're bleeding," she said, noticing the wound on his arm for the first time. "I've had worse." "Let me see it." Inside, they cleaned Gideon's wound while Elizabeth boiled water for coffee. The bullet had grazed his arm, painful but not serious. Clara wrapped it with clean cloth, her hands gentle but efficient. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Gideon asked. "My mother taught me before she died. Said a ranch wife needs to know how to patch up stupid men who hurt themselves doing stupid things." Clara tied off the bandage. "Guess she was right." Gideon almost smiled. "Guess so." They sat by the fire as dawn approached, the three of them alive and whole and still processing what had just happened. Elizabeth dozed in the chair, exhausted. Gideon stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. "What happens now?" Clara asked quietly. "Now we wait for Hayes to arrest Mercer. If Elizabeth's willing to testify about—" "I am," Elizabeth said without opening her eyes. "I'll tell them everything. Then it's over." Gideon looked at Clara. "Mercer goes to trial. We give our testimony. Justice gets served for once." "And after that?" "After that?" Gideon trailed off like he hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. What do you want to happen?" Clara thought about Black Hollow, about her father, about the life she'd left behind. Then she thought about this cabin, these mountains, this strange, complicated man who'd saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I want to stay," she said. "If you'll have me." Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Surprise, hope, maybe even happiness. "You mean that?" "I do." "You don't have to. You're free now. You could go anywhere, do anything." "I know." Clara met his eyes. "And I'm choosing to stay." Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink. A new day. A new chance. A new life. And for the first time since her mother died, Clara felt like she was exactly where she belonged. They buried the bodies before noon. Gideon wouldn't let Clara help despite her insistence, said it wasn't something she needed on her conscience. So she and Elizabeth watched from the cabin window as he dragged the corpses one by one into the trees, digging graves in the frozen ground with a pickaxe and shovel. It took him 4 hours, working with his injured arm, stopping occasionally to catch his breath or rewrap the bandage when it came loose. When he finally came back inside, his face was gray with exhaustion and pain. "They're buried," he said flatly. "Deep enough the wolves won't get them." Clara had coffee waiting, hot and strong. Gideon drank it standing by the fire, staring into the flames like he could see ghosts there. "You should rest," Clara said. "Can't. Hayes needs to know what happened." He set down the empty cup. "I'll ride to Silver Creek, bring him back to take statements. Should be back by tomorrow." "You're in no condition to ride anywhere." "I'll manage." "Gideon." Clara stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You were shot. You fought 6 men. You dug graves for 4 hours. You need to rest before you kill yourself trying to be tough." "If I don't get Hayes up here soon, Mercer has time to run. Time to destroy evidence, bribe witnesses, disappear." His jaw was set. "I'm not letting that happen." Elizabeth spoke up from where she sat by the window. "I can go." They both turned to look at her. "I know the way to Silver Creek," she continued. "I've ridden it a dozen times bringing supplies from town to Mercer's ranch. And if the sheriff needs convincing that this is urgent, I can tell him exactly what Mercer's been doing for years. What he did to Mary." Her voice hardened. "What he planned to do to Clara." Gideon studied her for a long moment. "You sure? It's a hard ride, and if Mercer's men are watching the trails—" "Let them watch. I'm done being afraid of him." Elizabeth stood, squaring her shoulders. "I ran once. I'm not running again." So they gave her Gideon's horse, the stronger, faster mount, and enough supplies for the journey. Clara watched her ride down the mountain with a mixture of admiration and worry. Elizabeth Chen had more courage than most people Clara had ever known. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, the cabin felt too quiet. Gideon stood on the porch for a long time, watching the empty trail. Clara came up beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You think she'll make it?" Clara asked. "Yeah, she's tougher than she looks." He glanced at Clara. "Kind of like someone else I know." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn. Stubborn's just another word for tough, when it comes down to it. Gideon turned to face her fully. You held your ground last night, stared down Mercer without flinching. That takes more than stubbornness. I was terrified the whole time. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway. He reached out like he was going to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it and dropped his hand. You saved my life, Clara. If you hadn't fired that warning shot, Mercer would have gutted me. You saved mine first, multiple times. That's different. How? Because He stopped, struggling for words. I'm used to violence, used to fighting. You shouldn't have to be. Clara thought about the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, scared, trapped, passive. That woman would have agreed with him, would have said violence wasn't for her, that she should stay inside while men handled the dangerous work. But that woman was gone. Maybe I shouldn't have to be, Clara said quietly. But I am, and I'm not sorry about it. Gideon looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Yeah, he said finally. I can tell. They went inside as the temperature dropped, another storm building on the horizon. Gideon tried to help Clara with dinner, but his injured arm made him clumsy. He knocked over a pot of water, cursed, tried to clean it up one-handed, and ended up making the mess worse. Sit down, Clara ordered, before you hurt yourself worse. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your bandage. Gideon looked down at his arm, noticed the red seeping through the cloth, and swore again. It's nothing. Sit. Down. This time he obeyed, dropping into a chair with a wince. Clara unwrapped the bandage and examined the wound. It had reopened, probably from all the digging. She cleaned it again, more carefully this time, and wrapped it with fresh cloth. You need to stop pretending you're indestructible, she said as she worked. I'm not pretending anything. Yes, you are. You act like pain doesn't matter, like injuries are just inconveniences. But you're human, Gideon. You can be hurt. You can be killed. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes I think you've forgotten. Clara tied off the bandage, maybe a little tighter than necessary. You went out alone last night against 7 men. You fought Mercer with a knife wound in your arm. You buried bodies for hours when you should have been resting. That's not strength. That's stupidity. Gideon blinked, clearly not expecting the anger in her voice. I was trying to protect you. And I'm trying to protect you, but I can't do that if you keep throwing yourself into danger like your life doesn't matter. My life doesn't. He caught himself, but too late. Clara's hands stilled. Finish that sentence. Clara, finish it. Gideon looked away, jaw tight. My life doesn't matter as much as yours. That's just fact. That's not fact, that's guilt talking. Clara gripped his good arm. You think because you couldn't save Daniel, you have to save everyone else? You think you owe the world something because your brother died? He died because of me. The words burst out of Gideon like they'd been locked up too long. I'm the one who told him to trust his gut, to speak up if something was wrong. I'm the one who taught him to be brave instead of smart. And it got him killed. Mercer got him killed, not you. I should have been there, should have protected him. You were 17 years older, living in a different county, working your own land. You couldn't have known what would happen. I should have. Gideon's voice cracked. He was my responsibility, my little brother, and I failed him. Clara understood then. The isolation, the self-imposed exile, the willingness to die protecting strangers, it was all penance. Gideon had been punishing himself for years, trying to earn forgiveness for a crime he didn't commit. Listen to me, Clara said firmly. Daniel's death wasn't your fault. Mary Hutchins' death wasn't your fault. None of what Mercer did is your responsibility to fix. Then whose responsibility is it? Mercer's. He's the one who made those choices. He's the one who pulled the trigger, who gave the orders, who decided other people's lives didn't matter. Clara moved to stand in front of him. You can't save everyone, Gideon. You couldn't save Daniel. You can't bring back Mary, but you saved Elizabeth, and you saved me. That has to count for something. Gideon looked up at her, and Clara saw the raw pain in his eyes. This man who'd seemed so hard, so unbreakable, was just as damaged as she was, just as lost. I don't know how to live with it, he said quietly. The guilt. You live with it by staying alive, by building something good instead of just destroying the bad, by letting yourself have this. Clara gestured around the cabin. A home. A life. Maybe even happiness if you stop punishing yourself long enough to try. I don't deserve... Stop. Clara's voice was sharp. Stop deciding what you deserve. You're not the judge. You're just a man who made mistakes and is trying to do better. That's all any of us are. Gideon stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached up and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. How'd you get so smart? He asked. I'm not smart. I just know what it's like to carry guilt that isn't yours. Clara thought about her mother, about the years she'd blamed herself for not being enough to keep her father from falling apart. And I know it doesn't help anyone to keep punishing yourself for things you couldn't control. They sat like that for a while, hands linked, the fire crackling between them. Outside, snow started falling again, light, drifting flakes that caught the last of the daylight. Clara made dinner with one hand, refusing to let go of Gideon until the food was ready. They ate in comfortable silence, the weight of the previous night's violence slowly lifting. After dinner, Gideon tried to help clean up, and Clara physically pushed him toward the bedroom. You're sleeping in the bed tonight, she said. Clara, that wasn't a request. You're injured, exhausted, and if you sleep on the floor by the fire, you'll be useless tomorrow when Hayes arrives. She crossed her arms. I'll take the floor. Like hell you will. Then we'll both take the bed. The words hung in the air between them. Gideon's eyes widened slightly. Clara, I'm not going to... I wouldn't... I know. And she did. Whatever else Gideon Crow was, he'd never broken his word to her. But the bed's big enough for two people to sleep without touching, and it's cold. We'll stay warmer together. She could see him trying to find an argument and failing. Finally, he nodded. That night, Clara lay on one side of the bed while Gideon lay on the other, a careful foot of space between them. She could hear his breathing, slow and steady, could feel the warmth of him even across the gap. Clara? Gideon's voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for what you said earlier about the guilt. Did it help? I don't know yet, but it's the first time anyone said it might not be my fault. He was quiet for a moment. That means something. Clara rolled onto her side to face him, though she could barely see his outline in the dark. You're a good man, Gideon Crow. I wish you could see that. I'm trying. That's all anyone can ask. She fell asleep listening to him breathe, feeling safer than she'd felt in years. Sheriff Walter Hayes arrived the next afternoon with Elizabeth and two deputies. They looked grim as they surveyed the blood-stained porch and the disturbed earth where Gideon had buried the bodies. Hayes was a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their statements without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather book. When they finished, he sat back and rubbed his face. This is a hell of a mess, he said. That's one way to put it, Gideon replied. Mercer came to my office yesterday morning, claimed you'd kidnapped his employee, he nodded at Elizabeth, and attacked his men without provocation, said he was exercising his legal right to retrieve stolen property. Clara's hands clenched. I'm not property. I know that, Mrs. Crow, but Mercer's got lawyers saying otherwise, saying the debt contract gives him certain rights, that Gideon's purchase was fraudulent, that the whole marriage was a scheme to cheat him out of what he's owed. That's horseshit, Gideon said flatly. I agree, but it's horseshit with legal paperwork attached. Hayes pulled out a document. Judge Morrison in Silver Creek issued a warrant for your arrest, both of you. Murder, conspiracy, theft. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. We defended ourselves. I know, and I believe you, but Morrison's in Mercer's pocket, has been for years. He's not interested in truth. He's interested in who pays his bribes. So what now? Gideon's voice was dangerous. We just let Mercer walk while we hang for defending our own home? No. Hayes stood and walked to the door, looking out at the mountains. Now we do what we should have done years ago. We take Mercer down properly, with evidence, witnesses, and a judge who isn't corrupt. You know one? Judge Sarah Crawford's. She's out of Helena, handles territorial cases. She's smart, fair, and mean as a rattlesnake when someone tries to buy her. Hayes turned back to them. If we can get her involved, she'll see through Mercer's lies. But we need solid evidence. We need witnesses willing to testify. And we need to move fast before Mercer disappears with all his money. Elizabeth leaned forward. I'll testify. I'll tell her everything. About Mary, about the other girls, about the orders Mercer gave his men. That's good, but we need more. Hayes looked at Gideon. You said you had evidence linking Mercer to your brother's death. Where is it? Scattered. Some of it's here, some in Silver Creek, some with people who are too scared to come forward. Gideon's jaw tightened. I spent years collecting pieces, but I could never get them all in one place at the same time. Then that's what we do now. We gather every scrap of evidence, every witness, every document. We build a case so strong that even Morrison can't ignore it. Hayes started pacing. The deputies and I will start tracking down witnesses. Elizabeth, I need you to write down everything you remember. Names, dates, conversations. Every detail matters. What about us? Clara asked. Respect. Hayes sighed. You stay here. Don't go to town. Don't show your faces anywhere Mercer's people might see you. Right now, you're safer in these mountains than anywhere else. So we hide while you do the work? Gideon didn't sound happy about that. You stay alive while I do the work. Big difference. Hayes fixed him with a hard stare. Mercer wants you dead or arrested. Either way, you're out of his path, so you keep your head down and let me handle the legal side. And if he comes back up here, then you defend yourselves again. But you make sure there are witnesses this time, my deputies, if possible. We need everything documented, everything legal. Hayes gathered his papers. I'll send word when it's safe to come to Helena for the trial. Until then, you sit tight. After Hayes and his deputies left with Elizabeth, the cabin felt emptier. Clara stood at the window watching them disappear down the trail, worry gnawing at her. You don't trust him, Gideon said from behind her. I trust him. I don't trust the system he's working with. Clara turned to face him. Mercer's had years to build his power. What if Hayes can't break through it? What if this Judge Crawford is just as corrupt as Morrison? Then we run. Run where? West, Canada, Mexico, somewhere Mercer can't reach us. Gideon moved to stand beside her. I've got money hidden, enough to start over somewhere new. We could disappear if we had to. Clara thought about that, abandoning the cabin, the mountains, this life they were just starting to build. Starting over as fugitives, always looking over their shoulders, never safe. I don't want to run, she said quietly. Me neither, but I'm not letting Mercer put a noose around your neck because the law's too broken to see the truth. So we wait. Hope Hayes pulls off a miracle, and if he doesn't, we disappear. Gideon took her hand. Together. The words settled between them like a promise. Together. Not just survival, not just convenience. Partnership. Choice. Clara squeezed his hand. Together. The next week crawled by in tense anticipation. No word from Hayes, no sign of Mercer. Just silence and snow and the constant waiting for something to break. Gideon spent his days checking the trapline, hunting, keeping them fed. Clara worked on the cabin, patching the bullet holes, replacing the shattered window, scrubbing the bloodstains from the porch until her hands were raw. At night, they slept in the same bed, that careful foot of space between them gradually shrinking. By the fourth night, Clara woke to find herself pressed against Gideon's back, her arm draped over his waist. She should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance. She didn't. Gideon was awake too. She could tell by the tension in his body, the way his breathing had changed. Sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. His voice was rough. I don't mind. Clara's heart hammered. You don't? Clara. Gideon rolled over to face her, close enough that she could see his eyes in the darkness. I've been trying real hard to give you space, to not push, to not assume anything, but if you keep touching me like that, I'm going to forget how to be a gentleman. Maybe I don't want you to be a gentleman. The words were out before Clara could stop them. Bold, terrifying, true. Gideon went very still. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. Clara's hand found his chest, felt his heart pounding beneath her palm. I'm saying I'm tired of pretending this is just about survival. I'm saying I see you, Gideon. Not the monster from the stories. Not the guilty brother carrying too much weight. Just you. And She took a breath. I want this to be real. It is real. Then stop treating me like I'm going to break. Stop sleeping a foot away like I'm made of glass. Stop acting like you don't want me when I can feel you holding your breath every time I get close. Gideon's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I want you," he said quietly. "I've wanted you since you stepped off that wagon, looking terrified and brave, and so damn beautiful I could barely think straight. But you were forced into this marriage. I wasn't going to force anything else." "You're not forcing. I'm choosing." Clara leaned into his touch. "I'm choosing you." When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or careful. It was desperate and hungry and real. The kiss of a man who'd been holding back for too long. Clara kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "You're sure?" Gideon asked. "Because if we do this, there's no going back. This becomes real in every way." "It's already real," Clara said. "This is just catching up." What happened next was awkward and nervous, and nothing like the romanticized stories Clara had heard. Gideon's injured arm got in the way. Clara's inexperience made her clumsy. They bumped noses, tangled in blankets, had to stop and laugh at themselves more than once. But it was real, raw and human and imperfect and theirs. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Gideon's fingers tracing absent patterns on Clara's shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A wife who actually wanted me. A home that felt like more than just a place to sleep. A reason to care about tomorrow." Clara pressed a kiss to his scarred chest. "You have it now." "Yeah." His arm tightened around her. "I do." They fell asleep like that. No space between them. No more pretending. When Clara woke the next morning, Gideon was already up, standing at the window with his rifle. She knew that stance by now. Alert, watchful, ready. "What is it?" she asked, pulling on her dress. "Rider coming. Fast." Clara grabbed her own rifle and joined him at the window. Sure enough, a single horse was climbing the trail, pushing hard through the snow. As the rider got closer, Clara recognized him. One of Hayes's deputies. Gideon was out the door before the man even dismounted. "What happened?" The deputy was breathing hard, his face red from the cold and exertion. "Hayes sent me. Judge Crawford agreed to hear the case. She's coming to Silver Creek next week for a preliminary hearing. If she likes what she sees, she'll move it to Helena for a full trial." "That's good news," Clara said, joining them on the porch. "There's more." The deputy's expression darkened. "Mercer knows about Crawford. He tried to leave town 2 days ago, packed up, took his money, headed for California. Hayes arrested him at the county line." Gideon's eyes went cold. "He's in custody. In the Silver Creek jail. But his lawyers are fighting it. They're claiming illegal arrest, saying Hayes has no jurisdiction, demanding he be released." The deputy shook his head. "Judge Morrison's backing them. He's scheduled a hearing for tomorrow to determine if Mercer can be held." "Morrison will release him," Clara said, "and Mercer will run again. Not if Crawford gets there first." The deputy pulled out a letter. "Hayes wants you both in Silver Creek tomorrow. Crawford's arriving early to observe Morrison's hearing. If she sees him trying to let Mercer go, she can intervene, use her territorial authority to override him." Gideon took the letter, scanned it quickly. "Hayes wants us to testify. Both of you, plus Elizabeth and anyone else who'll speak against Mercer." The deputy mounted his horse. "Hearing's at noon tomorrow. Don't be late." After he left, Clara and Gideon stood on the porch in silence, absorbing what they'd just heard. "This is it," Clara said. "Tomorrow decides everything." "Yeah." Gideon looked at her. "You ready?" Clara thought about the girl she'd been a month ago, scared, passive, trapped. That girl would have said no, would have begged to stay hidden in the mountains while someone else fought her battles. But that girl was gone. "I'm ready," Clara said. "Let's finish this." They rode into Silver Creek at dawn, the town still half asleep under a blanket of fresh snow. Clara had never seen it from this angle before, coming down from the mountains instead of up from Black Hollow. The buildings looked smaller somehow, more fragile, like the whole place could blow away in a strong wind. Gideon kept his hand near his rifle the entire ride, eyes scanning every shadow, every alley, every rooftop. Clara understood why. They were exposed here, vulnerable. If Mercer's men wanted to take a shot, this was their chance. But the street stayed quiet. Too quiet, actually. No one was out. No merchants opening shops, no ranch hands heading to work, no children playing in the snow. Just empty streets and shuttered windows. "They know something's happening," Clara said. "Yeah." Gideon's jaw was tight. "Whole town knows. They're staying inside until it's over." They found Sheriff Hayes waiting outside his office, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, and he had a coffee cup in one hand and a rifle in the other. "You made it," he said, relief clear in his voice. "I was starting to worry Mercer's men might try something on the trail." "We saw no one," Gideon said, dismounting. "Where's Elizabeth?" "Inside. Been writing testimony since yesterday, filling page after page with everything she remembers." Hayes took a long drink of coffee. "Judge Crawford arrived last night. She's at the hotel reviewing the case files. I've never seen anyone work that fast." "What about Mercer?" Hayes's expression darkened. "Still in custody, but his lawyers have been screaming bloody murder since we locked him up. Morrison's threatening to hold me in contempt if I don't release him before the hearing. Can he do that?" "Technically, no, but Morrison's never cared much about what he can and can't do legally." Hayes led them inside. "Crawford's our only shot. If she doesn't intervene, Morrison will spring Mercer, and we'll never see him again." Inside the office, Elizabeth sat at a desk covered in papers, her hand cramping around a pen. She looked up when they entered, and her face broke into a tired smile. "You came," she said. "Of course we came." Clara crossed to her and took her hand. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, but I've also been worse." Elizabeth gestured at the papers. "I've written everything down. Every girl I saw come through Mercer's house, every time I heard him threaten someone, every conversation that made my skin crawl." Her voice dropped. "I even remembered where I saw him bury something in the garden behind his ranch. Could be nothing, could be everything." Hayes straightened. "You never mentioned that before." "I didn't remember until last night. It was maybe 6 months ago, right after Mary disappeared. I woke up late, heard voices outside. Looked out the window and saw Mercer and 2 men digging. They were out there for hours. When they finished, Mercer told the men they'd never speak of it, or he'd put them in the ground too." "You think Mary's buried there," Gideon said quietly. "I think something's buried there, something Mercer didn't want found." Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly. "If you dig in the right spot, you might find proof he can't explain away." Hayes was already moving, calling for his deputies. "We need a warrant to search Mercer's property. You need Judge Crawford," a woman's voice said from the doorway. They all turned. Standing there was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a severe black dress and coat, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her eyes were sharp and calculating, missing nothing as she surveyed the room. "Judge Crawford," Hayes said, straightening. I didn't expect—" Clearly, she stepped inside, brushing snow from her shoulders. "I've been standing outside for the past 5 minutes, listening to witness testimony being discussed in a public hallway. If Mercer's lawyers heard any of this, they'd claim conspiracy and get the whole case thrown out." Hayes flushed. "My apologies, Your Honor. We were just desperate." "I know. I can smell desperation from a mile away." Crawford's gaze swept over Clara and Gideon. "You must be the Crows, the couple at the center of this mess." "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "Don't ma'am me. I'm not here to be flattered. I'm here to determine if Silas Mercer is the monster you claim, or if this is an elaborate revenge scheme cooked up by a vindictive mountain man with a grudge." She pulled out a chair and sat. "So, convince me. You've got 10 minutes before I have to face Judge Morrison, and I need to know if I'm backing the right side." The bluntness caught Clara off guard, but she appreciated it. No pretense, no political dancing, just straight truth. "Mercer killed my brother," Gideon said. "Daniel Crow. He was 17, working at Mercer's ranch, and he saw something he shouldn't have. 3 days later, he was dead. The men who killed him confessed to me before they died, said Mercer ordered it." "You killed these men?" Crawford asked. "Yes." "Self-defense?" "No, revenge." Crawford's eyebrow arched. "At least you're honest. Go on." "I've spent 5 years gathering evidence, witness statements, financial records showing Mercer bribing officials, documentation of girls who worked for him and vanished." Gideon pulled out a folder he'd been carrying. "It's all here. Names, dates, everything." Crawford took the folder and flipped through it quickly, her expression unreadable. "This is compelling. Circumstantial, but compelling." She looked at Elizabeth. "And you worked for Mercer directly?" "For 3 years," Elizabeth said. "I saw what happened to girls who crossed him. I saw him threaten people. I heard him order violence, and I know where he buried something he didn't want found." The garden behind his ranch, Crawford said. I heard. Unfortunately, I can't authorize a search warrant based on secondhand testimony from someone who was technically trespassing when she saw it. But you could if I testified under oath, Elizabeth said quickly, if I swore to what I saw in a formal proceeding. Morrison's hearing isn't a formal proceeding. It's a jurisdictional argument. Crawford set down the folder. But if I were to convert it into a preliminary examination of the evidence against Mercer, then yes, sworn testimony would carry weight. Hayes leaned forward. Can you do that? Convert Morrison's hearing? I can do whatever I want. I'm a territorial judge. He's a county judge. My authority supersedes his. Crawford smiled thinly. The question is whether I will, and that depends on whether I believe what I'm hearing. She turned her full attention to Clara. You've been quiet, Mrs. Crow. Tell me your part in this. Clara felt every eye in the room on her. She thought about lying, about softening the truth, about making herself sound more sympathetic. Then she remembered what Gideon had said. At least you're honest. My father sold me to settle his gambling debts, Clara said. He'd already promised me to Mercer, but Gideon paid more and bought the contract first. Married me to keep Mercer from claiming me. I didn't want to marry either of them. I didn't have a choice. So you were purchased? Like property? Yes. And now you're defending the man who purchased you. I'm defending my husband, Clara corrected. The man who gave me choices when no one else did. The man who stood between me and someone far worse. The man who's risked everything to stop Mercer from hurting anyone else. Crawford studied her for a long moment. You love him? The question caught Clara off guard. Did she love Gideon? She hadn't let herself think about it in those terms. Love seemed too simple a word for what they had. Too clean, too easy. What she felt was complicated and messy and built on violence and survival and desperate nights in a mountain cabin. But it was real. Yes, Clara said. I love him. She felt Gideon's sharp intake of breath beside her, but she didn't look at him. Kept her eyes on Crawford. The judge nodded slowly. All right, I'll back your play, but if this goes sideways, if I find out any of this testimony is fabricated or exaggerated, I'll throw the book at all of you. Understood? Understood, they said in unison. Crawford stood. The hearing starts in 2 hours. Hayes, I want armed deputies in that courtroom. If Mercer's men try anything, I want them subdued immediately. Crows, you sit behind the prosecution table where everyone can see you. Elizabeth, you'll be my first witness. And someone find me the best damn cup of coffee in this pathetic town, because I'm going to need it. She swept out of the office like a force of nature, leaving stunned silence in her wake. I like her, Elizabeth said finally. Yeah, Hayes said. So do I. The courtroom was packed by the time they arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding outside trying to hear through the windows. Clara recognized faces from Black Hollow. Ranchers, merchants, families who'd watched her grow up. They stared at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity, like she was some kind of spectacle. Mercer sat at the defense table flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was just another inconvenience. When his eyes met Clara's, he smiled slightly. Mocking, confident. Clara's hands clenched into fists. Gideon's hand found hers under the table. Easy, he murmured. Don't give him the satisfaction. Judge Morrison entered, a fat, sweating man who looked nervous despite his position of power. He took the bench, banged his gavel, and started speaking before Crawford even entered. This hearing will determine whether Sheriff Hayes acted within his authority when arresting Mr. Mercer without proper warrant, or this hearing, Crawford's voice cut through the room like a blade, will determine whether there is sufficient evidence to charge Silas Mercer with murder, conspiracy, and a list of other crimes too long to enumerate before lunch. Morrison's face went purple. You have no jurisdiction here. I have territorial jurisdiction, which supersedes your county authority. Sit down, Morrison, before I have you removed for obstruction. Crawford took the bench beside him, not replacing him, but clearly in charge. This is now a preliminary examination. Bring in the first witness. The next 3 hours were brutal. Elizabeth testified first, her voice shaking but steady as she described the years at Mercer's ranch. The girls who disappeared, the screams she heard at night, the blood she found, the burial she witnessed. Mercer's lawyers objected constantly, calling her testimony hearsay, claiming she was a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. But Crawford shut them down every time, and Elizabeth kept talking. Next came two ranch hands who'd worked for Mercer years ago. They testified about orders to threaten families, to run people off their land, to destroy property. Both men were visibly terrified, their eyes darting to Mercer as they spoke. But they spoke anyway. Then Gideon took the stand. He told the story of Daniel's death in a flat, emotionless voice. The discovery of the body, the investigation that went nowhere, the confessions he'd extracted from the men who killed his brother. He presented documents showing Mercer's payments to Judge Morrison, bribes to various officials, financial transactions that coincided with people disappearing or dying. Mercer's lawyers attacked viciously, trying to paint Gideon as a violent criminal seeking revenge through legal manipulation. But Gideon didn't rise to the bait, just answered their questions with the same flat honesty, never embellishing, never getting defensive. By the time Clara took the stand, the courtroom was silent with tension. "Mrs. Crow," Crawford said, "tell us about your father's debt and how you came to marry Gideon Crow." Clara told it all. The gambling, the desperation, her father's deal with Mercer, Gideon's intervention, the forced marriage that became something else, Mercer's attempts to take her by force. "And did Mr. Mercer make threats against you personally?" Crawford asked. "He said he'd burn the cabin with me inside if I didn't come with him willingly. He brought armed men to carry out that threat. He tried to kill my husband over a contract he didn't even legally own." Clara looked directly at Mercer. "He wanted to own me, and when he couldn't, he decided to destroy me instead." Mercer's lawyer stood. "Objection. The witness is clearly biased." "The witness is the victim," Crawford snapped. "Sit down." The lawyer sat. After Clara came more witnesses, people from town who'd been threatened by Mercer, families who'd lost land to his schemes, a doctor who'd treated injuries he suspected came from Mercer's house but was too afraid to report. Each testimony added another stone to the weight crushing down on Mercer's defense. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Crawford called a recess. "Sheriff Hayes," she said, "based on the testimony I've heard today, I'm issuing a warrant to search Silas Mercer's property, specifically the garden area behind the main house. You have 24 hours to execute that search and report your findings." Morrison tried to object, but Crawford cut him off with a look that could have frozen water. "Additionally," she continued, "I'm denying the motion to release Mr. Mercer. He will remain in custody pending further investigation, and if I find that you, Judge Morrison, have been accepting bribes as the evidence suggests, you'll be sharing a cell with him." Morrison's face went from purple to white. He opened his mouth, closed it, then fled the courtroom like his robe was on fire. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some cheering, some shouting, Mercer's supporters yelling about injustice and corruption. His lawyers surrounded him, frantically whispering strategies. Mercer himself just stared at Clara with cold hatred in his eyes. She stared right back, refusing to look away. Hayes and his deputies dug up Mercer's garden that night, working by lamplight while half the town watched from a distance. Clara and Gideon stood with Crawford on the edge of the property, waiting. They found the first body after an hour, wrapped in canvas, exactly where Elizabeth had said it would be. It took them another hour to confirm it was Mary Hutchins, identified by a locket her mother had given her. They found two more bodies before midnight, girls who'd worked for Mercer and run away. Girls whose families had been told they'd gone to California, to Denver, to somewhere better. Girls who'd been murdered and buried like garbage. Crawford watched the bodies being carried out in grim silence. When the last one was loaded into the wagon, she turned to Clara and Gideon. "This goes to trial in Helena," she said. "Full territorial court. I'm charging Mercer with 3 counts of murder, conspiracy, bribery, and attempted murder of the 2 of you. The trial starts in 3 weeks." "Will it be enough?" Clara asked. "To convict him? With this evidence? With these bodies? With the testimony we've gathered?" Crawford's smile was cold. "He's going to hang, Mrs. Crow, and there's not enough money in this territory to save him." 3 weeks later, Clara stood in a Helena courtroom watching a jury foreman read the verdict. The trial had been everything Crawford promised, brutal, thorough, and damning. Witness after witness had testified. Document after document had been presented. The bodies spoke for themselves. The jury had deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Mercer's face finally cracked, the calm confidence shattering into rage and disbelief. He lunged toward the judge, shouting obscenities before deputies tackled him. They dragged him from the courtroom, still screaming threats, still insisting this was all a conspiracy, still unable to comprehend that he'd finally lost. Crawford sentenced him to hang. No delay, no appeal would change it. The execution was set for 2 weeks. Clara felt Gideon's hand find hers, squeezing tight. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's really over." Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them. Clara had never seen so many people with notebooks and questions, all shouting at once. But Hayes and his deputies formed a wall, pushing them back, clearing a path. Elizabeth was waiting by their wagon, her own bags packed. She'd testified for the prosecution, given her statement, done everything Crawford asked. Now she was free to go wherever she wanted. "What will you do?" Clara asked. "I've got family in San Francisco. Haven't seen them in 10 years, but they wrote saying I'm welcome if I want to come home." Elizabeth smiled, but it was bittersweet. Figured it's time to stop running from the past and try building a future instead. "You saved us," Clara said. "You risked everything to warn us, to testify. We owe you our lives." "You don't owe me anything. You gave me a chance to do the right thing after years of staying silent." Elizabeth hugged her tightly. "You be happy, Clara Crow. You've earned it." She hugged Gideon too, then climbed into a coach heading west. They watched until it disappeared around a corner. "We should go home," Gideon said. "Home." The word settled warm in Clara's chest. Not a cabin, not a hiding place. Home. They rode back to the mountains in comfortable silence, the weight of the past weeks finally lifting. The trial was over. Mercer would hang. Judge Morrison had resigned in disgrace. The corruption that had poisoned the territory for years was being torn out by the roots, and Clara and Gideon were free. When they reached the cabin, snow was falling again, light, peaceful flakes that caught in Clara's hair and made everything look clean. Gideon helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. "You said something in Hayes's office," he said. "When Crawford asked if you loved me." Clara's heart hammered. She remembered saying yes without hesitation, without thinking. "I meant it," she said quietly. "Even though I bought you? Even though you didn't choose this?" "I chose to stay. I chose to fight beside you. I chose to testify. I chose to come back here." Clara reached up and touched his scarred face. "Maybe I didn't choose the beginning, Gideon, but I'm choosing everything that comes after." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you too," he said. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep my distance, trying to be honorable about it. But I failed. Been failing since the day you stepped off that wagon looking terrified and too damn brave for your own good." Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We're a mess, aren't we?" "Yeah, but we're our mess, no one else's." They went inside, shaking snow from their coats, feeding the fire back to life. The cabin felt different now. Warmer somehow, more alive. This wasn't just Gideon's place anymore, or Clara's refuge. It was theirs. That night, as they lay tangled together in bed, Clara thought about all the choices that had led her here. Her father's debts, the forced marriage, the violence and fear and desperate gambles. None of it had been what she wanted. None of it had been fair. But somehow through all of it, she'd found something she'd stopped believing existed. Freedom. Not the kind that came from having no ties, no responsibilities, no connections. The kind that came from choosing who to tie yourself to, who to fight for, who to love. She'd been sold like property and ended up finding herself instead. Gideon's arm tightened around her in his sleep, and Clara pressed closer, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong. 2 months later, the first thaw came early. Clara stood on the cabin porch watching the snow melt, revealing brown earth and the first green shoots of spring. Behind her, Gideon was working on expanding the cabin, adding another room, building up the walls, making space for a future they were just starting to imagine. A rider appeared on the trail. Clara tensed instinctively before recognizing Sheriff Hayes. He dismounted and climbed the steps, looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Mercer hanged yesterday morning. Went to the gallows, still claiming he was innocent, still cursing your names. But he's dead. It's done." Clara felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no closure, just a sense of something finished, a door closing on a chapter of her life she was ready to leave behind. "Thank you for telling us," she said. Hayes nodded. "Also wanted to let you know, Judge Crawford appointed a special prosecutor to clean house in Silver Creek. Morrison's facing charges, along with half a dozen other officials who were taking Mercer's money. The whole territory is getting a fresh start." "Because of what happened here," Gideon said, joining them on the porch. "Because people finally stood up and fought back. You two started something when you refused to run. Other folks are finding their courage because of it." Hayes smiled. "Town's already telling stories about the mountain man who saved a girl from a monster and the girl who saved him right back." After Hayes left, Clara turned to Gideon. "They're going to make us into a legend." "Let them. Long as they leave us alone to live our lives, they can tell whatever stories they want." Clara thought about the stories she'd heard growing up. About monsters and heroes, victims and villains. Simple stories where people were one thing or another, where good and evil were easy to identify. But real life wasn't that simple. Gideon Crow was a killer who'd chosen mercy, a monster who'd shown compassion, a man carrying enough guilt to crush him who'd still found room to love. And Clara herself was no pristine victim. She'd shot men. She'd stared down evil without flinching. She'd chosen violence when violence was needed, and forgiveness when forgiveness was possible. They were both messy, complicated, imperfect people who'd somehow found each other in the worst possible circumstances, and made something good from it anyway. That was the real story. Not the legend Black Hollow would tell, but the truth they lived every day. Summer came, and with it, more changes. Clara started a garden, coaxing vegetables from the mountain soil. Gideon expanded his trapline, bringing in enough furs to trade for supplies and a little extra. They talked about getting chickens, maybe a cow. Small things. Normal things. The kind of life Clara had thought was lost to her forever. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Clara's hand rested on her stomach, feeling the small flutter of movement there. She hadn't told Gideon yet. Wasn't sure how. Wasn't sure what it meant for their future. But she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, a child, a larger family, decades of quiet mountain life, or some new challenge they couldn't yet imagine, they'd face it together. That was the choice they'd made, the choice they kept making every single day. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, noticing her smile. "The future," Clara said, "and how it's nothing like I expected." "Better or worse?" "Different." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, over the place where their child was growing. "But definitely better." Gideon's eyes went wide as understanding dawned. "Clara, are you—" "Yes." For a moment he just stared at her, emotions flickering across his face too fast to name. Then he pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I don't know how to be a father," he said quietly. "Don't know if I'll be any good at it. Neither of us knows what we're doing. We'll figure it out as we go." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Just like we've figured out everything else." The mountains stretched out before them, vast and indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere down below, Black Hollow was probably telling stories about them, embellishing, mythologizing, turning real people into legends. But up here, in this cabin they'd defended and rebuilt and made their own, Clara and Gideon Crow were just two people who'd been forced together by circumstances beyond their control and had chosen to make it work anyway. They'd been property and purchaser, victim and savior, prisoner and guard. But those roles had fallen away like old skin, revealing something simpler underneath. Husband and wife, partners, two damaged people learning to be whole together. And if that wasn't the most powerful kind of freedom Clara could imagine, she didn't know what was. The sun sank below the mountains, and they sat together in the gathering dark, listening to the nightbird's call and the wind whisper through the pines. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices. But tonight, they had each other. And that, Clara had learned, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.